"I'll spare you tonight," the Apache said, "but my condition will haunt you forever." The wind whispered across the sand, carrying with it the faint scent of dry earth and distant sagebrush. A lone traveler moved carefully along a narrow trail, his boots crunching against the hard ground. Dust clung to his clothes and his face was lined with exhaustion. He had been walking for hours, perhaps days, and the heat of the day had drained every ounce of energy from his body. The desert was beautiful but unforgiving, and he had learned that respect for its harshness was not optional. He paused for a moment to drink from his small canteen, the water warm and barely enough to quench his thirst. His eyes scanned the horizon, hoping to see the faint outline of trees or a distant river. But there was nothing, just the endless expanse of desert stretching in all directions. He felt a chill, not from the temperature, but from a deep sense of unease. Something about the silence made him wary. The desert had its own language, and he was not sure he could understand it. Birds had long flown away to their nests, and the only sounds were the soft whisper of the wind and the faint shifting of sand. As he walked further, he noticed small signs in the sand. Footprints that were not his own, faint and fleeting, disappearing with the next gust of wind. His heart beat faster. He had heard stories of travelers who had been lost or found by those who lived in the desert, men and women who had claimed these lands for centuries. The Apache were known to watch over their territory with care, and the traveler had heard whispers of their skill and courage. His first thought was to turn back, but he was too far along the path. Turning back might be just as dangerous as continuing forward. Shadows grew longer as the sun dipped lower. The traveler slowed his pace, trying not to make noise. Every sound seemed amplified in the quiet of the desert evening. Then in the distance he saw movement, a figure standing tall on a dune watching him. His heart skipped a beat. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, a mirage caused by the heat of the day. But the figure remained, calm and still, almost like a statue carved from the earth itself. He could not see a face, but he could feel the weight of those eyes upon him. They were watching, judging, and he knew instinctively that this was no ordinary person. Panic threatened to overtake him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had survived many dangers before, but this felt different. This was not a storm or a wild animal. It was a presence, deliberate and focused. He tried to make himself appear smaller, less threatening, moving slowly along the trail. Every step he took seemed to echo, betraying him. The figure began to move too, sliding down the dune with a grace that made the traveler's heart pound. Soon, he realized he was being surrounded. Shadows appeared on the ridges of the dunes, and he could see more figures emerging, silent and careful, like the wind itself had given them form. Fear gripped him fully now. He knew the stories of what could happen to travelers in these lands. He had heard tales of men who were caught off guard, of those who had angered the Apache and paid with their lives. He wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The dunes were tall, the sand soft, and every path seemed to lead deeper into the territory of those watching him. He stopped and raised his hand slightly, a gesture of surrender. He did not know if it would matter, but he hoped it would show that he meant no harm. The figures moved closer. The traveler could see the glint of metal and the soft leather of weapons, but it was not the weapons that frightened him. It was the calm determination in their movements. They were careful, precise, and unhurried. Among them, one figure stood taller than the rest. This figure did not carry the same energy of alertness or tension. Instead, there was a calm that seemed stronger than the desert itself. The traveler's eyes met this figure's gaze, and something inside him froze. There was no anger, no cruelty in the eyes, but a weight, an authority that demanded respect and attention. The tall figure finally spoke. The voice was low and even, carrying across the distance like the echo of the desert itself. The traveler had never heard such a voice, yet it felt familiar, like a sound he had known all his life. The words were few, but they carried meaning far deeper than their simplicity. The traveler could not understand the full intention behind them, but he could feel the command in them. This was a man who could decide life and death, and he did not have to say more. Time seemed to slow as the traveler and the leader faced each other. The other figures stood slightly behind, silent, like shadows frozen in motion. The traveler's mind raced, trying to find a way to explain his presence, to plead for mercy, to make sense of what had happened. Every excuse he could think of felt inadequate, almost foolish. He had crossed into lands he did not know, among people he did not understand, and now he was completely at their mercy. Finally, the leader moved closer, and the traveler could see him more clearly. His features were strong, weathered by years under the sun and wind. His eyes were sharp and intelligent, yet there was a softness hidden beneath, a wisdom earned through life. The traveler realized that this man had seen much, survived much, and carried knowledge that the traveler could barely imagine. And yet, he felt no hatred, only a profound presence that made him aware of his own smallness in this vast desert. The desert grew darker as the sun disappeared completely behind the hills. The traveler felt a cold sweat on his forehead. His thoughts were a whirlwind of fear and relief, of regret and hope. He did not know if he would live through this night, or if his fate had already been decided. But in that moment, he understood something very important. Life was fragile, and courage was measured not only in action but in understanding and respect. He lowered his eyes and waited. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of dry earth and smoke from a distant fire. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the whispers of the desert. The traveler knew that his life depended on the decision of this man, a decision that could come at any moment. And yet, amidst the fear, he felt a strange clarity. He had entered a world he could not control, and all he could do was face it with honesty and humility. Hours seemed to pass in those few minutes. The leader studied him, taking in every detail of his posture, his expression, his eyes. Finally, he spoke again, and the words were simple, almost gentle, yet their weight was heavy. "I'll spare you tonight." The traveler's heart leapt, relief flooding through him like a river breaking a dam. He had expected death, and instead, he was given a chance that would change his life forever. But the relief was tempered by the leader's next words. He was warned that being spared was not freedom, that mercy always carried a price. The traveler could not yet understand what that price would be, but he knew instinctively that it would haunt him for the rest of his life. As the figures receded into the shadows of the dunes, leaving him alone in the growing darkness, he realized that he had been given something far more valuable than life itself. A lesson that would follow him forever, a responsibility he could not ignore. That night the traveler sat by his small fire, staring into the flames. The desert stretched endlessly around him, silent yet alive with memory and presence. He could feel the weight of what had happened pressing on him. He had survived, but survival was not the same as freedom. The desert had taught him humility, fear, and respect in ways he had never imagined. And as he drifted into a fitful sleep under the vast sky, he knew that the encounter with the Apache leader would not leave him. It would be a shadow, a guide, and a reminder of the night that had spared his life but demanded his conscience. By the time dawn broke, painting the desert in soft pink and gold, the traveler was already changed. The encounter had left a mark deeper than any wound, shaping his understanding of courage, mercy, and the responsibilities that came with life. He rose, stretched, and continued on his journey, but he did so with a new awareness. The desert, the leader, and the silent watchers had taught him a truth he would never forget. Freedom is not given lightly, and life, once spared, carries the weight of choices yet to come. The first light of dawn slowly crept over the desert, casting long shadows across the dunes. The traveler awoke to a sky painted in soft shades of pink and gold, the cool morning air a relief from the harsh heat of the previous day. He rubbed his eyes and stared around, remembering the terrifying encounter he had faced the night before. The memory of the Apache leader's calm, commanding presence was still vivid in his mind. He could feel the weight of those eyes upon him, eyes that had seen so much and carried the quiet power of experience. Relief had washed over him when the words were spoken, "I'll spare you tonight." Yet, as he sat by the small fire he had built, he realized that the relief was only the beginning of a much deeper journey. Life had been given back to him, but it came with a weight he could not yet fully understand. The desert around him seemed alive in a way he had never noticed before. Every windswept dune, every shifting shadow seemed to whisper reminders of the encounter, as if the land itself remembered and demanded respect. He began walking again, but this time his steps were cautious, deliberate. Each sound, each movement felt significant. The traveler had always considered himself prepared for danger, but nothing in his life had taught him how to face the quiet, patient judgment of someone who could take life or give it freely. He understood now that survival was not only about avoiding harm, it was about recognizing the responsibility that came with being spared. The thought made his chest tighten, and he wondered how he could ever repay or honor such mercy. As he moved along the trail, he recalled the exact words the leader had spoken, the promise of mercy paired with a price. The traveler did not know what form that price would take, but a feeling settled in him, a strange combination of fear, respect, and curiosity. He thought about what he might have done differently, how he could have avoided this encounter altogether. Yet, deep down, he knew it was impossible to undo the past. He had been given a chance, and the future now depended on how he would handle it. The desert was quiet but not empty. Birds chirped softly in the distance, and small animals scurried beneath the brush. The traveler's senses were sharpened, noticing details he would have ignored before. A shift in the wind, the tracks of a coyote, a lone cactus silhouetted against the rising sun, all of it seemed to carry meaning. The encounter with the Apache leader had changed the way he saw the world. Every movement of nature felt deliberate, as if the desert itself were guiding him, teaching him, warning him. By mid-morning, the traveler came upon a small dry creek bed. He knelt to drink from a shallow pool of water, marveling at how even the smallest resources could sustain life. As he drank, he reflected on the words of the leader. Mercy had been offered freely, yet it was not unconditional. There was a lesson hidden within the act, a truth he was meant to understand through experience. It was clear that the Apache did not act out of cruelty or vengeance. They valued life and sought to teach those who entered their lands. The traveler realized that the encounter had been as much about learning as it had been about survival. The thought of learning, however, brought its own anxiety. What was expected of him now? How could he honor the decision of a man whose wisdom and authority were beyond his comprehension? These questions weighed on him, pressing heavily on his mind as he walked. Each step forward felt like a step into uncertainty, yet he understood that hesitation would not serve him. He had been spared, and that was only meaningful if he chose to live with awareness, with responsibility, and with respect for the life he had been allowed to continue. Hours passed, and the traveler's path led him to a rocky plateau overlooking the desert below. He sat down to rest, taking in the sweeping view. The vastness of the land reminded him how small he was, how fragile human life could be. It was easy to forget, in the safety of town or the comfort of home, that the world could be both beautiful and dangerous. The encounter the night before had stripped away his illusions. He had glimpsed the raw reality of life and death and had been spared. That sparing carried a significance far beyond the simple act of survival. As he rested, the traveler's thoughts returned repeatedly to the leader. He had watched him closely during the encounter, noticing small details that spoke of character. The steady way he held himself, the calm in his voice, the eyes that seemed to see everything without judgment, yet with understanding. The leader had been more than a protector of his people. He had been a teacher, a guide, someone who could inspire respect and fear in equal measure without raising his voice or brandishing a weapon. The traveler realized that such people existed in the world, even if rarely, and encountering one could change a person forever. Suddenly, movement caught his attention. A figure appeared on a nearby ridge, and for a moment the traveler's heart raced. He froze, remembering the terror of the previous night. But as the figure drew closer, he saw that it was not a threat. It was a solitary traveler like himself, carrying water and supplies, making his way cautiously across the desert. The presence of another human being was comforting, yet it also reminded him of how vulnerable people could be. Life was precious, and mercy even more so, because it could be given or taken depending on circumstance. As the day wore on, the traveler encountered small signs of life that had once gone unnoticed. A family of rabbits huddled beneath the shade of a bush, a hawk circling lazily above the cliffs, the faint glimmer of water in the distance. These small moments of beauty reminded him that survival was not simply about escaping danger. It was also about seeing and appreciating the world in its fullness. The desert, once only a place of threat, now felt alive with lessons, each one waiting to be understood by those willing to notice. Evening approached, and the traveler made camp near a cluster of rocks. He built a small fire, careful not to attract attention from the desert's hidden inhabitants. He thought back again to the words of the Apache leader. There was a weight in them, a sense that life spared was not a gift to be taken lightly. The traveler felt an unfamiliar mixture of gratitude and apprehension. He had been given a second chance, yet the knowledge that this mercy came with a condition left him uneasy. He could feel it pressing upon him even though he did not yet know its full nature. Night fell and the desert grew silent once more. The traveler stared into the fire, his mind spinning with questions. What would happen if he failed to honor this mercy? Could he ever repay the debt? The lessons of the desert and the encounter were clear. Yet he knew the hardest tests often came after the moment of crisis, in the quiet hours when a person was left alone with their thoughts and conscience. He resolved to remember the words of the leader and carry them with him, knowing that the memory itself might become his guide. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of the desert and the faces of those he had seen the night before. He dreamed of the tall Apache leader, standing silently among the shadows of the dunes, eyes steady and commanding. He dreamed of the vast desert, both beautiful and unforgiving, stretching endlessly in all directions. And he dreamed of the future, uncertain yet full of possibility, shaped now by the mercy he had been granted. In the quiet of the night, he understood something he had never before realized. Life, once spared, carried lessons that could never be ignored, and every choice he made from this point forward would matter in ways he could not yet comprehend. By morning, the traveler rose again, determined to continue. The desert had taught him humility, patience, and the quiet strength of respect. He walked with careful steps, mindful of the land, mindful of the memory of mercy, and mindful of the unseen condition that now followed him. He knew that his journey was only beginning, that each day would test him in small and large ways, and that the words of the Apache leader would echo in his mind, guiding him even when the path seemed unclear. The traveler's heart, once burdened with fear, now carried a new awareness. He had faced death and been spared. He had seen a wisdom and strength that few ever encountered. And he had come to understand that mercy, when given, was not merely an act of kindness. It was a responsibility, a call to live with care, honesty, and attention to the world around him. The desert, once a place of danger, had become a classroom. The Apache leader, once a figure of fear, had become a teacher. And the traveler, now alive and mindful, knew that he would carry both the lessons and the memory with him forever. The traveler had walked for days since the encounter, his body tired but his mind alert. Each step across the desert felt heavier now, not because of the sand or the heat, but because of the thoughts that followed him wherever he went. The words of the Apache leader echoed in his mind. "I'll spare you tonight, but my condition will haunt you forever." At first, he had tried to ignore them, telling himself he had survived and that was enough. Yet the more he thought about it, the more he realized that mercy had never been simple, and that a debt, even one invisible, could weigh on a person more than any physical burden. By the third day, the traveler reached a small settlement near a river. The sight of people working, children laughing, and merchants calling out their goods brought him a strange mix of relief and unease. Life in the town felt safe, almost mundane compared to the desert. Yet even here, the memory of the desert and the Apache leader followed him. He could not eat comfortably, could not laugh freely, and even sleep brought dreams of sand, shadows, and eyes that seemed to see everything he had done and everything he might do. The condition he had agreed to in the desert was invisible, but its presence was undeniable. One evening, he wandered to the edge of the river, where the water ran clear and cool over smooth stones. He knelt, letting the water run over his hands, trying to wash away the tension in his body. But the traveler understood that no water could wash away what he carried inside. The condition given to him by the Apache leader was not a physical task. It was a responsibility, a burden of conscience, a constant reminder that life, once spared, was never truly free. Every choice he made would now be measured against an unseen standard, and every action could carry consequences beyond his understanding. As he sat by the river, the traveler reflected on what had happened. He remembered the calm authority in the leader's eyes, the way he had observed every detail of the traveler's posture, expressions, and even his hesitation. It was as if the leader had seen not only the traveler's actions but his potential, his fears, and his weaknesses. The traveler realized that this condition was not punishment but a challenge, a lifelong test of character, and he began to understand why the leader had spared him. It was not merely mercy. It was an opportunity to grow, to live differently, and to face the weight of responsibility every day. The days that followed were not easy. The traveler tried to continue with his life, helping in the small settlement, working in fields, carrying water, and assisting those in need. Yet, each task reminded him of the desert and the leader's words. Simple actions became moments of reflection. If he lied, even in small matters, he felt the shadow of the condition pressing upon him. If he acted selfishly, he felt a pang of guilt that would not fade. Even kindness became a conscious effort, not because it was easy, but because he now carried the invisible expectation of accountability. At night, when the settlement was quiet and the stars glittered above, the traveler often stared at the sky, thinking about the Apache leader. He wondered what would have happened if he had refused the condition, if he had been reckless or arrogant. The thought made his heart race. He knew that the leader had offered mercy because he saw potential in him, but that potential came with responsibility. Life spared was not freedom. It was a path that required constant vigilance, honesty, and respect. One morning, as the traveler was tending to a small garden in the settlement, a young boy approached him. The boy had been watching him for days, curious about the newcomer who seemed different from the others. "Why do you always look so serious?" the boy asked. The traveler paused, unsure how to answer. How could he explain that his life had been spared under a condition that would follow him forever? How could he describe the weight of mercy, the constant reminder of responsibility, and the invisible test that measured every choice he made? Instead, he smiled gently and said, "I am learning to see the world differently." The boy nodded, seemingly satisfied, though the traveler knew the words were only a small part of the truth. The condition was not something he could share. It was a secret, a guiding force, and a reminder that some lessons were meant to be carried alone. Every day he walked with this knowledge, aware that his actions mattered not just to himself, but to the unseen balance of life and the lessons he had been given. Weeks turned into months. The traveler continued to work and help in the settlement, yet his mind was never at rest. He had begun to notice subtle changes in himself. He became more patient with others, more careful with his words, and more aware of the consequences of his actions. He listened more than he spoke, observing the lives of those around him and learning from their choices. The condition the Apache leader had set was shaping him, guiding him and haunting him in equal measure. It was invisible, yet unmistakable, like a shadow that never left, following him with quiet persistence. One evening, as he sat near the river again, the traveler thought about the concept of mercy. He realized that the act of being spared had transformed his understanding of life. Mercy was not simply an escape from harm. It was a lesson, a reminder of the value of each moment and the responsibility that came with survival. The traveler understood now that the condition would never leave him. It was not something to be solved or avoided. It was something to be carried, learned from, and honored for the rest of his life. The traveler also began to notice how the condition affected his interactions with others. When he saw someone in need, he felt a strong impulse to act, to help, and to be patient. When he encountered dishonesty or cruelty, he felt a quiet resistance within himself, a refusal to participate in actions that would violate the lessons he had been given. Even small decisions, such as whether to speak harshly or forgive a minor mistake, became opportunities to honor the condition. It was exhausting, but it was also shaping him into a person he had never been before, more thoughtful, more compassionate, and more aware of the impact of his actions. The seasons changed, and the traveler continued to live with the constant reminder of the desert and the Apache leader's words. He traveled further, visiting nearby villages and helping wherever he could, yet the memory of the desert never faded. The condition haunted him not as a punishment, but as a presence that guided him, nudging him toward choices that reflected integrity and awareness. He realized that this invisible burden was teaching him more than any teacher or book ever could. It was shaping his character in ways that were profound and lasting. One day, as he walked through a forested area near the edge of the desert, he encountered another traveler in need. The man had fallen and was injured, unable to continue on his journey. Without hesitation, the traveler offered help, lifting the man onto his shoulders and carrying him to safety. As he did, he felt the quiet echo of the Apache leader's presence within him, guiding his actions. He understood now that the condition was not merely a test to punish him. It was a guide to shape him, to teach him the true meaning of responsibility, mercy, and courage. The journey continued, and the traveler faced many challenges, both physical and emotional. He became aware that the condition affected him not only in moments of action, but also in moments of thought. He could not ignore fear, anger, or impatience. They were reminders of the responsibilities he had accepted. Every decision carried weight, and every choice mattered. Yet despite the burden, he felt a sense of purpose growing within him. The condition, though haunting, was also a source of direction and clarity. It gave meaning to his survival and shaped the person he was becoming. At night under the stars, the traveler often reflected on the lessons of the desert and the encounter that had changed his life. He understood now that being spared had been an opportunity, not a gift. The condition that followed him would always challenge him, reminding him that life was fragile, that mercy was powerful, and that every action carried consequences beyond what could be seen. He accepted this as part of his journey, knowing that it was a responsibility he could not escape, a shadow that would guide him forever. And so the traveler walked on, mindful of the lessons, aware of the condition, and determined to live each day with honesty, courage, and respect. The desert, the Apache leader, and the words that had been spoken to him were never far from his mind. They shaped him, haunted him, and guided him in equal measure. He knew that life spared was not freedom. It was a path, a challenge, and a responsibility that would follow him forever. And though the weight was heavy, he felt a quiet strength growing within him, a determination to honor the mercy he had been given every step of the way. Life continued to unfold for the traveler, but it was no longer the life he had once known. The desert, the encounter with the Apache leader, and the haunting condition that followed him had changed him forever. He moved among people in towns and villages, helping where he could, yet always aware of the invisible weight on his shoulders. Even ordinary tasks felt different now. Washing clothes, drawing water, or preparing food were no longer routine actions. They were small tests of patience, honesty, and care. Each day was a lesson, and every interaction a mirror reflecting how well he was living under the condition that had been set upon him. At first, the traveler found this burden overwhelming. It was exhausting to be constantly aware of every word, every gesture, every thought. He noticed mistakes he would have once ignored, lapses in patience that seemed insignificant but now carried weight in his conscience. Sometimes he felt frustrated with himself, wishing he could forget the desert and the leader's warning, wishing he could simply live without constant vigilance. But he soon realized that such wishes were futile. The condition was not temporary. It was a part of him now, as real as his own heartbeat. He could not escape it, and learning to live with it became the greatest challenge of all. One afternoon, the traveler visited a nearby village to trade some supplies. As he walked through the marketplace, he noticed a heated argument between two merchants. One was accusing the other of cheating, shouting and waving his arms. The traveler stopped and watched, feeling the familiar weight of the condition pressing upon him. He could not ignore the conflict, yet he also knew he could not force resolution with harsh words or impatience. Carefully, he stepped forward, speaking in a calm and measured tone, encouraging both sides to listen and understand each other. It took time, but eventually, the merchants calmed and agreed to a fair solution. The traveler realized that these moments, though small, were exactly what the condition demanded. Life spared was not just about survival. It was about learning how to act with awareness, integrity, and compassion. Every act of patience, every effort to resolve conflict without anger, strengthened him and reminded him of the responsibility he carried. The desert and the Apache leader's words had taught him that mercy came with an expectation, that he would live thoughtfully and honorably, even when it was difficult. As months passed, the traveler noticed more changes in himself. He became more attuned to the needs of others, more cautious with his words, and more deliberate in his actions. Small kindnesses, like helping an elderly woman carry water or assisting a child who had fallen, felt more significant than ever before. He realized that these acts were not merely social niceties, they were reflections of the condition that followed him. Life spared had created a new lens through which he saw the world. Nothing could be ignored, and every decision, even the tiniest one, had weight. Despite his growing awareness, the traveler sometimes felt the heaviness of the condition keenly. At night, when the village was quiet and the stars shimmered above, he would sit alone, thinking about the desert and the leader's eyes. He wondered if he was living up to the expectations, if he was being honest with himself, and if he truly understood the lesson he had been given. Sometimes, the memories of the desert were so vivid that he could feel the sand beneath his feet and the wind on his face as if he were back there, standing before the leader once again. The weight of survival and responsibility was inescapable. One evening, a traveling family arrived in the village. They were weary and hungry, their children exhausted from the long journey. The traveler immediately offered to help, preparing food, tending to their needs, and making sure they were comfortable. As he worked, he felt the familiar guidance of the condition, reminding him that mercy, once received, should inspire further acts of care. This small family, like the travelers he had once been, depended on the kindness of others, and he understood that his actions could make a real difference in their lives. He felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, even as the weight of the condition remained with him. The traveler also began to notice the subtle ways in which the condition shaped his relationships. He found it harder to be careless or dishonest in dealings with others. Small temptations, such as cutting corners or speaking without thinking, were now met with a sense of inner resistance. He understood that his life had been spared for a reason, to teach him awareness, responsibility, and moral courage. Every choice, no matter how minor, had significance, and the more he honored the lessons, the more he felt the quiet strength of living under the condition, as though it were guiding him like an invisible hand. Despite his growing understanding, the traveler sometimes struggled with doubt and fatigue. There were moments when he wished the condition would lighten, when the constant awareness felt like a chain he could not break. He longed for the simplicity of life before the desert, before the encounter with the Apache leader. But even in these moments, he knew that the lessons were vital. Life spared was a gift, but it was also a responsibility that could not be ignored. And the traveler, learning to accept the weight, discovered that the challenge itself was shaping him into a stronger, wiser person. As the seasons turned, the traveler began to see how the condition influenced not only his actions, but also his understanding of the world. He noticed patterns in human behavior, recognizing that fear, pride, and impatience often led to conflict. He also saw how patience, compassion, and honesty could transform situations, prevent harm, and bring peace. The lessons of the desert had been abstract when he first experienced them, but now, living among people, he understood their practical importance. The condition was not punishment, it was a guide to becoming a better person, one choice at a time. One afternoon, the traveler came upon a group of children playing near the river. One of the boys fell and scraped his knee. The traveler rushed to help, cleaning the wound and comforting the child. He realized that these small acts of care were not just kindness, they were opportunities to honor the condition. Every interaction, every moment of attention, was a chance to live according to the principles he had been given in the desert. He began to see that the Apache leader's condition was not a burden in the negative sense. It was a framework for living with integrity and awareness, teaching lessons that could last a lifetime. As the traveler's reputation for honesty and compassion grew, more people sought his guidance. Villagers came to him for advice, for help resolving disputes, and for support in times of need. He often reflected on the irony that a condition that had seemed like a haunting burden had become a source of strength and purpose. The traveler had learned to see mercy not only as something received, but also as something to be shared. And in sharing it, he discovered that the lessons of the desert were being passed forward, shaping the lives of others even as they shaped his own. Yet, despite his growing understanding and influence, the traveler remained aware of the invisible presence that accompanied him. At night, he would sit by the fire and think about the desert, the leader, and the condition. It was always there, a quiet reminder that life spared was not freedom without responsibility. He understood that the lesson was not temporary. It would follow him for the rest of his life, guiding his choices and shaping his character. And though the weight was constant, it also gave him direction, purpose, and a deep understanding of what it meant to live fully and honorably. The traveler also began to notice how the condition affected his internal world. He became more reflective, more patient with himself, and more aware of his own faults. Moments of anger or frustration were now tempered by an understanding that he carried a responsibility beyond himself. Mistakes were no longer simple accidents. They were opportunities to learn and grow, to correct course, and to honor the principles of mercy and responsibility that had been set for him. The condition, once a haunting burden, was now a teacher, guiding him in subtle but profound ways. Over time, the traveler realized that his life had changed completely. The person he had been before the desert encounter no longer existed. Fear, courage, patience, and awareness had replaced carelessness and ignorance. The Apache leader's words had not only spared his life, they had given him a new way of seeing and experiencing the world. He understood that the condition was eternal, following him wherever he went, shaping every choice and reminding him that life was a gift to be treated with respect, integrity, and care. By the end of the year, the traveler had fully embraced the lessons of the condition. He continued to live among the villagers, helping, guiding, and learning. He understood that the weight of the condition would never leave, but he also realized that it was not a curse. It was a guiding force, shaping him into someone capable of true mercy, compassion, and responsibility. Life spared had taught him that survival was only the beginning. The real challenge was how to live, honorably and fully, with the gift of a second chance. And so, the traveler continued his journey, aware of the haunting yet guiding presence of the condition. Every day brought choices, tests, and opportunities to live with care, and every night brought reflection and growth. The lessons of the desert, the encounter with the Apache leader, and the condition that followed him forever had changed him irrevocably. He was no longer simply a traveler through the world. He was a man shaped by mercy, guided by responsibility, and determined to live a life that honored the gift he had been given, step by step, day by day. The traveler had walked countless miles since that night in the desert. Each step was lighter in body but heavier in mind, for the weight of the condition the Apache leader had set upon him never left. It was no longer a shadow of fear, but a constant companion, a silent guide that shaped his choices and thoughts. He had learned to live with it, to listen to it, and even to trust it. Life, he now understood, was not simply a matter of surviving but of living consciously, honorably, and responsibly. As he moved through the villages and fields, he saw the impact of his actions. People began to notice him not just as a traveler passing through, but as someone who carried a certain calmness, a fairness, and a thoughtfulness that was rare. Villagers sought his advice, children approached him with trust, and neighbors looked to him for guidance in small disputes. The traveler realized that the condition he carried had not only changed him, it had quietly influenced the people around him. His life, spared and shaped by that night in the desert, was now touching others in ways he could not have imagined. Even in moments of rest, the traveler felt the presence of the condition. At night he would sit by a fire, watching the flames dance and reflect on the lessons of the desert. The eyes of the Apache leader haunted him, not in fear, but in memory, reminding him of responsibility, integrity, and awareness. He understood that the mercy he had received was not simply a gift to live, but a call to live in a way that honored life itself. Every day was now measured not only by survival, but by the choices he made, the care he offered, and the honesty he maintained. Sometimes the traveler revisited the desert where it all began. He would stand among the dunes, feeling the hot sand beneath his feet and the wind against his face. It was a place of silence, reflection, and understanding. He remembered the moment when the leader had said, "I'll spare you tonight, but my condition will haunt you forever." At first, he had feared the haunting. Now he realized that it was guidance. The condition was not meant to punish but to teach. The desert had been a classroom, the leader a teacher, and the weight he carried a lifelong lesson in living fully, consciously, and honorably. Over time, the traveler noticed subtle changes within himself. Decisions that once felt impulsive were now measured. Emotions that once controlled him were now tempered by reflection. Even moments of anger or frustration were softened by his awareness of the responsibility he carried. He began to see that true freedom was not the absence of danger or obligation, but the ability to act rightly, to live with purpose, and to honor the trust that had been placed upon him. The condition, once a haunting burden, had become the foundation of his character. The traveler also reflected on the nature of mercy. He realized that mercy was not merely sparing life. It was an opportunity, a responsibility, and a challenge. Life had been given back to him, but only with the expectation that he would live in a way that respected its value. This understanding shaped not only his actions toward others but also his thoughts and intentions. He became patient, compassionate, and mindful. He saw the consequences of choices more clearly, the ripple effects that a single act could have on many lives. And he embraced this awareness, knowing it was part of the lesson he had been given. Years passed, and the traveler's life unfolded with quiet purpose. He moved through towns, settlements, and fields, always aware of the presence that followed him. People remembered him for his fairness, his calm judgment, and his acts of kindness. The young boy who had once asked why he looked so serious had grown into a young man, influenced by the traveler's quiet example. The traveler understood that the lessons of the desert and the condition were not only shaping his life, but were spreading, subtly and profoundly, into the lives of others. Mercy, responsibility, and awareness were contagious when lived with sincerity. Even as he grew older, the traveler never forgot the desert night. The memory remained vivid, clear, and powerful. He could see the tall figure of the Apache leader, calm and commanding, eyes steady yet full of wisdom. He could hear the words spoken so long ago, and he understood them fully now. The sparing of life had been an act of trust and an invitation to grow. The condition that haunted him had been a guide, not a punishment, a force that had shaped him into someone capable of living with awareness, compassion, and integrity. The traveler began to share his understanding with others, though cautiously. He did not speak of the encounter in detail, for some things were meant to remain sacred and private. Instead, he shared lessons about patience, responsibility, and the importance of living with integrity. He told stories of the desert, of survival, and of the quiet power of mercy, always focusing on the lessons rather than the fear. People listened, inspired by his calm presence and the sincerity in his words. They felt the weight of his experiences, even if they did not know the full story, and many began to reflect on their own choices and actions. In quiet moments, the traveler would sometimes smile at the strange irony of life. The burden he had once feared, the condition he had thought would haunt him forever, had become a source of strength. It had taught him self-discipline, compassion, and wisdom. He had learned that freedom was not simply living without fear, but living with awareness and responsibility. The desert, the leader, and the condition had shaped him into a man who could face the world with courage, patience, and understanding. The traveler also began to understand that the lessons he had received were timeless. The desert and the Apache leader had taught him principles that applied not only to survival, but to every aspect of life: honesty, integrity, patience, and care for others. He realized that these lessons were universal, and that mercy, when truly understood, was a force that could transform lives. Even as he aged and the hair on his head turned silver, he carried these principles in his heart, knowing that the lessons would never fade. One day, the traveler found himself standing on a high hill, overlooking a valley filled with villages, rivers, and forests. He reflected on his journey, from the desert encounter to the years of living under the condition. He understood now that life spared was not simply about being alive. It was about living well, with attention, care, and purpose. The Apache leader's words had been more than a warning. They had been a gift, a challenge, and a guiding force. The traveler felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing that his life had been forever transformed by that single act of mercy. As he walked back to the village, the traveler noticed the small ways in which the world was connected. A child helping an elderly neighbor, farmers working together to share water, and neighbors resolving disputes peacefully. He smiled, recognizing the echoes of the lessons he had learned. Life, he realized, was made up of countless small choices, and each one mattered. Mercy, responsibility, and awareness were not abstract concepts. They were lived experiences, reflected in every action, every word, and every thought. The traveler understood at last that the Apache leader's condition was not a haunting curse, but a lifelong guide. It had shaped him, taught him, and given his life meaning. He knew that the weight he carried would never leave, and he no longer wished for it to do so. The condition had made him more than he had ever been before, stronger, wiser, compassionate, and fully aware of the value of life. Every choice he made from that point forward would honor the gift he had been given, and he embraced this responsibility willingly, with gratitude and humility. As the sun set over the valley, the traveler paused, feeling the warmth of the fading light on his face. He thought about the desert night, the leader, and the words that had set his life on this path. He realized that being spared had been more than an escape from danger. It had been the beginning of a journey that would last a lifetime. The condition, though invisible, had shaped him in ways no one could see, guiding him to live fully, ethically, and consciously. He had learned that mercy was not simply an act of giving life, but an opportunity to transform it. In his final reflection, the traveler felt peace. He knew that the lessons would remain with him until his last breath. The Apache leader's words would echo in his mind forever, reminding him of the desert, the encounter, and the responsibility of life spared. And he understood now, completely and without doubt, that the condition had not been a burden but a gift, a guiding force that would continue to shape his actions, his character, and his understanding of the world. The traveler continued his journey, older, wiser, and more aware than ever before. Every step he took, every action he made, carried the echo of that desert night. The mercy he had received had changed him, and the condition he carried had guided him to live with integrity, compassion, and respect for life. Though the world around him continued to change, the lessons remained constant, a reminder that survival alone was never enough. Life, when spared and guided by responsibility, could become extraordinary. And so, the traveler walked on, carrying the weight of the condition not as a curse but as a lifelong companion. He had learned the true meaning of mercy, the value of responsibility, and the power of living consciously. The Apache leader's words had haunted him, guided him, and transformed him. Life, once spared, had become a journey of awareness, courage, and compassion, a journey he would honor every day for the rest of his life.